Hi, this is Jack for iPokerVIP.net. Today I'm going to talk about fold equity in another short concept video. So to understand what we mean by fold equity is essentially the equity we gain from making our opponent fold. We usually use it when we're talking about bluffing or semi-bluffing. In this concept video, we're mostly going to focus on semi-bluffing because you should always try and make sure that you have some equity when you're bluffing, and we'll get into why that's so important in just a short while. So let's look at some simple maths formulas for working out how much fold equity we need, or how often we need our opponents to fold when we make a bet or a raise in order to show a profit. Essentially, we're going to take what we risk by either our bet or our raise, and we're going to divide that by what we're risking plus the current pot. So to put that in an example, let's assume the pot's 10 and our opponent bets 5. Now the pot size is 15. If we raise to 15, then we're going to need 50% fold equity. Sounds obviously intuitive because we're risking exactly the same as what we can win. Shouldn't be too hard to get your head around this concept. So I hope that you can obviously follow that easily enough. Now let's think about when we're semi-bluff raising. Basically, it can often be better to raise a draw than just flat call. We talked about that in the previous video when we were talking about implied odds. And the reason is that if we miss the turn and our opponent two barrels, usually we're going to have to fold our draws because we don't have the implied odds to call. Whereas when we raise, our opponent's either going to fold, in which case we take down the pot right now with a hand that is only a draw, which is obviously a good thing. Or he's going to re-raise the flop and we can fold. We can get away from our hand because he's almost always going to have a set or a very, very strong hand there. Or he's going to call and then check the turn. And of course, when he checks the turn, we can check it back and see a free river. So essentially, we're raising the flop to see both cards. So we get to realize our 35% equity. Another thing to think about is also that is very, very rarely going to re-raise the flop. Most of the time, I'd say definitely over 90% of the time, on almost every board, your opponent's either going to fold or he's going to call your raise. Very, very rarely at small stakes is opponent going to be free bet bluffing the flop, unless it's particularly dry, because then of course you don't really represent anything by raising. But a lot of the times when you're semi-bluff raising with a draw, he's going to assume that you've either got a big made hand that's raising to get the money in because he doesn't want to see a scare card come, or that you're raising with a big draw looking to stack off. So he's almost never going to free bet bluff the flop, and he's almost always just going to free bet for value with hands like sets or with like really strong overpairs. So if he calls, like we said, we get to realize our 35% equity, which means that when we raise, we're not risking that $15 or that 15, those 15 bets anymore. If we talk about it in dollars, might make it easier. So yeah, let's assume that pot's $10, opponent bets $5, we raise to 15. When we got 35% equity when called, we're not really risking 15 anymore. We're risking 65% of that 15 because, of course, sometimes when he calls, or like 35% of the time when he calls, we're going to manage to hit by the river. We're not really focusing on implied odds here, even though when we do hit, we might be able to squeeze out a little bit of value. We just want to see how it affects the fold equity equation. So if we calculate this in, if we're risking 15 times, well, 65% of 15 to win 65% of 15 plus the 15 that's in the pot, because of course if he folds, we win the 15, and if he calls, we don't lose our 15. We lose our 15 65% of the time. And the other 35% of the time we don't lose anything because we win the pot. But basically what this affects is makes the numerator lower, so that our overall fold equity after you look at this equation is considerably lower than when we have no equity at all, as in the first example. So from the previous example, we can see that he has to fold 20% less often when we have a flush draw, because he only has to fold 40% instead of 50%. Now that's pretty huge. And if you think about it, when most people see at the flop, they're almost always going to be folding more than 40% to a raise, just because, assuming their range isn't just super, super nitty, they're going to have just high card hands like ace king or ace queen, or they're going to have, some medium pairs that they would see bet in, and now they just fold it to a raise. So it's really important to remember that any equity makes our hand so much more valuable to bluff with, because we can, we're not risking the raise size, we're risking a percentage of the raise size, since obviously some of the time we're going to hit and be able to win the hand. Additionally, sometimes we've got great implied odds when we're semi-bluffing, particularly if we're in a free bet pot. If we see bet the flop and get called, very often when we hit the turn we're going to be able to extract more value because obviously the pot is huge, He's not risking much. If he is to stack off, he's not risking much relative to the pot size. So if he has got a hand, you're much more likely to be able to get money from him. Or if we two barrel the turn, because of course if we bet the flop and bet the turn and our opponent still keeps calling, chances are that he's looking to try and go to showdown. He's usually got a pretty strong range there. Finally, we won't be able to calculate exactly how much fold equity we're going to need, but we should know that we don't need much when we've got equity. If we've got a flush draw, or if we've got an open ender, or even a gut shot with an overcard or something like that, we should know that we don't need much fold equity in order to justify raising or two barreling. And now we're going to get into some hand histories that will demonstrate this in practice. So this is the first hand I wanted to show you, quite straightforward hand. Folds to us on the button, and we raise with 6-4 suited, which is obviously standard. Small blind folds and big blind calls. He's playing 61-33, so it's probably going to be a fish. Flop comes 9-3-2 two-tone. We've got gut shot and a backdoor flush draw. It's obviously quite dry in terms of it doesn't really hit many of his hands that he calls with pre-flop. So I'll go ahead and fire out c-bet, expecting him to just fold a decent amount of the time and knowing that I have some equity when I do get called. He goes ahead and calls and the turn's a 10. Now I've got a flush draw with a gut shot, so I've got a lot of equity versus his calling range on the flop, because if you think about it, most of his range on the flop, if he has a set or if he has some random two pair, he's going to check raise because this is a really drawy board. So most of the time when he does check call, it's going to be like ace high, pocket sixes, pocket sevens, maybe a 9. But basically his range is going to be pretty weak, so I've got a decent amount of equity against it. And also a lot of his range just has to fold on the turn anyway. I think he's going to fold all his hands like pocket fours, pocket fives. He's going to fold ace high unless it's ace 10, or if he picked up hearts to go with his ace high, then he's probably going to call again. But I think I'll get a decent amount of folds. And also, if he does call the turn again, I'm going to assume that I've got pretty good implied odds on a heart or a 5 river. Reason is that he's not going to put me on necessarily put me on a flush draw when I'm two barreling here. And if hearts hits on the river, then it means diamonds have missed. So it's kind of like, well, you know, half the time he's going to have a missed draw anyway. Also, my 5 is obviously super disguised, and a 5 is a really good turn river card for him in terms of if he calls this turn with like 8-9 and the river's a 5, obviously it's a really good card for him. So he's almost always going to check call. But if he calls this turn and the river's a heart, I think he's almost always going to check call as well. Just because once he calls the turn, his range is obviously pretty strong. And we managed to bink the flush on the river, and I go ahead and fire a big river bet. He calls and he ended up having 10-7, but I'm pretty sure that if he happened to have like ace 9 or some king 9, he's probably going to call the river anyway, because a lot of straight draws missed and diamonds missed. So yeah, I mean, this is really important to note. Like if the river had been a total blank, obviously I wouldn't have continued barreling. If I'd had diamonds and missed, I wouldn't have bluffed this river either, because I would have expected him to. I'd expect him to be looking to call me down once he calls the turn, and it makes the turn bet so much better, because it means like once I do hit, you know, I bet 56 and managed to get value. So it's kind of like, I mean, on the turn when I bet 22, I need him to fold something like 45% of the time maybe, if I have no equity when called. I think he does fold probably close to that on the turn, definitely. But considering how much equity I have when called, plus the fact that I can extract like $56 worth of value when I do hit the river, means that I need much less fold equity than that in reality. So the next hand here, I open ace king from sort of middle position, get called by the button and get called by the small blind. Flops queen, 3 rainbow, they checked me. I'm definitely going to fire a c-bet here. Both of these are quite straightforward players. If we look at Zola 94, you see like 49% fold to c-bet, raise c-bet 7, so he's not really messing around on many boards. Neither's Blinchick, you can see like 55% fold to c-bet, raise c-bet 11, so I think that they're going to play pretty straightforwardly on this flop. They're going to peel if they've got like sort of pocket 8s, pocket 9s hand. They're obviously going to call if they've got a queen, but I don't think they're going to get fancy and like, you know, raise with say 7-8 suited or anything like that. So I definitely think I can go ahead and c-bet here, knowing that when I do get called, I still have some equity anyway, because of course if they call with a hand like pocket 9s, I've got 2 overcards to that. But mainly just going ahead and c-betting because I think I'll get enough folds. Blinchick check calls. I think he's going to check call with a lot of hands like 6s, 7s, 8s, 9s, you know, on this type of flop texture, because he assumes I can be c-betting it light. There's also not a ton of queen x hands in his range. He free bets with decent frequency pre-flop, so sometimes he's going to be free betting with like ace queen or like king queen offsuit because he's got blockers. So and also I don't think he's necessarily going to be calling pre-flop with like queen jack or queen 10. So I think that when he checks here, I'm going to get a lot of folds by betting the turn, because obviously like pocket 8s, pocket 9s are just going to fold now. I think the only hands that continue is going to be a queen. And of course, if the river is a 10, if I manage to hit that river, then I'm going to have huge implied odds, because if he's got ace queen or king queen, which is going to be his most likely hand when he check calls this turn, then I've obviously got just massive implied odds, because he's not going to fold it on a 10 river. So I'll go ahead and bet. I think I do get a lot of folds here. Again, like betting like 2/3 pot. Going to need him to fold, you know, just around 40% of the time. And I think that he's definitely going to fold more often than that, considering all the times he's going to have like a medium pocket pair. But he does go ahead and check call, so now I know pretty much that he's either got like pocket jacks or a queen. Don't think there's only one combo of pocket queen jack suited anyway. Definitely don't think he's calling with queen jack offsuit pre-flop. The river comes a 10 and he checks to me, and to be honest, like I don't think he's going to fold a queen, even though I think king queen should definitely be a fold on this river, and I also think ace queen probably should as well, since I know that he's got a queen. When he check calls turn, it'd be pretty much suicidal for me to bluff this river. So I go ahead and overbet shove, because I think that he's always going to call with a queen. And he does call, and he happens to have ace queen. Basically, the reason for betting this turn again, like just to reiterate, is because I think I get enough folds in terms of all his hands that are medium pocket pairs, and when I do get called, I have massive implied odds on a 10. So if we think that I'm only going to hit the river, say like 8% of the time or so with my gut shot, but that 8% of the time I'm going to win like, I mean, most people would probably bet about 85. So that 8% of the time I'm going to win at least 85. I actually went for an overbet. Well, actually, what am I talking about? At least 8% of the time, you know, you're going to win like, if the pot's 232, most people might bet like 150. So once you get called, you're going to win like 150 or so on the river. If you hit, you know, that 8% of the time, you're going to always win on 150. But I think that, you know, considering I could overbet and get value there from ace queen, shows that this is just a massively plus EV turn barrel, because all the times he folds, I pick up the pot, and all the times he calls and I manage to bink, I get paid. Obviously, if the river was an ace or a king, I wouldn't be betting, I'd just be checking back. So that's something to bear in mind. This next hand is from Full Ring game, Full Ring Rush, when that used to run. But basically, I just looked through my database for hands that would be suitable, and these were all hands that were very suitable for what the point I'm trying to illustrate. Ken the Cow opens on the button, and we go ahead and re-raise with king queen. Could flat call, could free bet. You know, you have to mix it up sometimes, like probably like 50-50. Here I decided to go ahead and re-raise. He calls my free bet, and we see a flop. It's ace 10-5 rainbow. I'll go ahead and see bet, obviously, like, because I assume most people would. He's going to fold all his connectors that missed. He's going to fold his small pairs and stuff like that. Obviously, the flop hits my range a lot harder than his. Now it turns a club, giving me a flush draw. This is a spot where I think a lot of people would just check and give up, you know, figuring that his range is decently strong once he calls on ace 10-5, but I think this is a really mandatory 2-barrel. And the reasons are basically when he has an ace and he calls this turn, he's almost never going to fold on a club river. So if I do get called here and bink the river, then I'm almost always getting paid. And if I bet $100 here and he calls, the pot's going to be like $350 going to the river, and I'm going to be able to extract at least like $250 worth of value if I manage to hit. Also, if I 2-barrel here and he's got a 10, he has to be in a pretty tough spot. He's going to, I mean, he's, you know, assume he's going to fold a lot of 10x hands on the turn, like 10-9, Jack 10. Even a weak ace, maybe, but he probably peels again with a weak ace, to be honest. And obviously all the hands like king, queen, king, jack, queen, jack, I assume he's going to float the flop with, and I assume he's going to fold now on the turn when I 2-barrel. So I definitely get a lot of folds by betting like $100 here. Although, you know, even 84, like I still get a lot of folds. I would have preferred to see myself bet a little bigger though, like 100. Just because then I think he's put in a much more tough spot with a 10. I think for this price he probably just peels again with that. And then he goes ahead and calls, and I managed to bink the river. I actually managed to bink my jack. Now if this was a club, if this was like 6 of clubs, I would just bet huge on the river, because I think that he wouldn't fold like ace jack or ace queen. You know, he'd put me on like Miss Broadways or whatever. But when the river card's a jack, I think that he's with a hand like ace queen. He might fold if I bet huge, because now he really beats like nothing unless I'm turning showdown value into a bluff. And so I go ahead and bet small, well, smallish, rather than betting like 280 or 290. This leaves him room to like jam if he's got ace jack, or even if he's got jack 10, he might be able to jam here for value. Also leaves him to, you know, jam if he slow played a set or something. Gives him a little bit of an easier call with like ace queen or slow played ace king. Whereas if I bet like 280, 290, I think that he'd probably go ahead and fold those, or at least he'd fold ace queen, probably wouldn't fold ace king. But anyway, he goes ahead and looks where he shoves, and he ends up having pocket fives. But yeah, I think again the reason for betting the turn is that we have a lot of outs when called, and when we do get called and hit the river, we're going to be able to extract a lot of value. And we just have a lot of fold equity on the turn as well. So this is definitely a mandatory 2-barrel. This wraps up what I wanted to say about fold equity. So now we've had implied odds and fold equity. You can see that implied odds definitely linked into fold equity, and the reason is that obviously when you're bluffing, you want to have equity in the hand. You want to have outs, and if your opponent's range is strong, then when you have outs, you have a lot of implied odds. So the two link together quite well. So definitely go back and watch the implied odds video if you haven't already. This was kind of more of an expansion on that, incorporating fold equity into it as well. Hope that you found this video useful. Definitely leave any comments, questions, and I'll get back to you. This has been Jack for ipokervip.net. Take care.